Well, welcome everybody back to the Sales Revolution. I'm Ingrid Maynard, Managing Director and founder of The Sales Doctor, and I'm welcomed today by Glen Simpson. Hello, Glen.
Hello, Ingrid.
So let me introduce Glen. Glen is an Adelaide Tech Chair over a number of tech groups, including Tech 13, which hosts some of Adelaide's leading companies. Now, TEC stands for the Executive Connection, which is a foundation that enables CEOs, business owners and senior executives to come together with non-competing businesses to have confidential discussions and fellowship, mentorship, as well as group sessions and workshops to work on their businesses. It's quite a unique and very special place. Now, coming back to Glen, Glen holds a PhD in agriculture and has held technical and executive positions across a range of international organisations, including the United Nations. His expertise is in the reconstruction of social and physical infrastructure following conflict and natural disasters in developing countries. So I'm in amazing company this morning. I had the privilege of actually meeting Glen through tech when he invited me to speak at a couple of his tech groups, and Glen was one of the first sounding boards for my thinking about mutual mattering, who just got it. So thank you so much for spending time with me here today, Glen.
Yeah, my pleasure, Ingrid.
Fantastic. So, Glen, let's start with, when you started studying agricultural science at university, where did you see it taking your career?
Well, when I started, it was really a world of academia and research, but what I found was that agriculture as a discipline gave me an opportunity to work in other countries, and from that I basically built a career helping food shortage in developing countries around the world.
Was that something that you set out to do? Was it something almost like a calling of what you wanted to do in the world and then found a discipline that enabled you to do that? Or was it kind of you went into that discipline and then you discovered that that's something that you then wanted to explore?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question about life, really. You like to think that you plot and plan, but one thing leads to another. And I think, as Steve Jobs said in his commencement address to Stanford, when you're making dots in life, they don't join up. But when you look back, you can see the logic of why everything happened the way it did. So whilst I set out as a research scientist, I ended up having to work in countries where there are disempowered individuals and communities, and it certainly changed my perspective on our traditional roles and things that we focus on in developed countries.
Well, that's what I want to explore a little bit with you. How do you think having an agronomist's discipline gave you a different corporate leadership lens than other executive pathways like, say, finance or engineering?
Well, the career that I took put me into situations where people didn't have the options that we have, and one thing that evolved from that was that I became very outputs focused as opposed to inputs, and it was the results had to benefit the communities you're working in, and if that wasn't the outcome, then the activity was wasted. So that meant that you started to see every resource that was deployed in terms of beneficial impact to the communities, as opposed to just focusing on purely business and financial outcomes, community outcomes.
And how's that sort of changed the way that you see business and business leadership now?
Yeah, I think one of the things to achieve those outcomes with very limited resources is you had to get a complete alignment around the purpose of all your activities with your teams and with the beneficiaries, because if there wasn't alignment, you didn't have access to the resources you needed to make a difference. So one ended up focusing a lot more on the people as opposed to the process.
Well, that's purpose and people. They're two words that I would absolutely use to describe your philosophy and part of your orientation to everything that you do. It's certainly been my experience of you. So, Glen, let me ask you this then. So in your roles as executive chair, executive director and managing director, who did you see as your customers?
The customers, that's a term that we use in business a lot, but I tend to look at activities in terms of beneficiaries, and they're not just your client. Primary beneficiaries include everybody working for a goal and on an objective, and that starts with the people surrounding you, and every stakeholder has to be aligned around what is the outcome, what does success look like and what's the outcome, how is that going to manifest itself. So it's more of a holistic view of beneficiaries delivering an outcome as opposed to a client or purely a one-to-one business to customer.
Well, that's a fantastic way to look at doing business. As a group of beneficiaries, then also delivering to their own beneficiaries as well. That there's a series of beneficiaries. So, what were some of the lessons that you took from those roles, and maybe talk to us a little bit more about those beneficiaries? Because it really is about service to others, regardless of role or rank. And you're talking about being outputs focused versus inputs focused, that you're really talking about everything that you're doing. I know when you talk about those communities that at first that you were instrumental in helping to rebuild infrastructure for, when we think about communities in business, we have a number of different communities, we have a number of different beneficiaries. What were some of the lessons that you've taken from all of the roles that you've had so far that you could share with us about, the role of being of service to our beneficiaries?
Yes, so we've talked about beneficiaries being multidimensional, and in terms of benefits and beneficial impacts, it's more than just the goals. You'll get a lot of personal development. You get a lot of life experience from working in aligned teams, and alignment around purpose at an individual and team level is not only is it an incredibly powerful, but people find that an amazingly rewarding way to deliver outcomes. And when I talk about teams, it's not just the delivery teams on your side, it's teams of the beneficiary, the people directly working on an activity towards an outcome, plus all of the stakeholders involved. If they're all aligned, I think your model of a magnet, if the particles aren't aligned, it's powerless, but it's an exponential increase in power if you get alignment around purpose.
Look, it really is very powerful, and it sounds quite straightforward, and yet getting alignment around purpose is perhaps one of the most challenging roles for any executive. What were some of the things that you did to make sure that there was alignment around purpose?
Well, every individual has to think deeply about what they want to do with each day of their life, and with the right leadership, individuals can be inspired to see that working on something that rewards them in terms of personal and professional development and delivers outcomes is, once you get a team aligned around that, it's a joy to be part of. People want to experience it again and again, and you get much more impactful outcomes for resource inputs. I think the thing that one tends to overlook is that individuals really respond to and enjoy working in a positive directed team, and in a way it's sort of like being in flow. Time just disappears, and it's just a great way to deliver it. But as a leader, to create that environment, you've got to have a combination of authenticity and integrity.
What's the difference between the two in your eyes?
I just remember reading Susan Scott, I think it was, in her Fierce Conversations, and I spent a lot of time in boats, so it meant a lot to me, but I've reflected on it over the decades, and that is, a leader, what she said was a statement that didn't make sense to me initially. She said, a leader is responsible for their emotional wake. What that means is that as a leader, you cannot say one thing and think something different. However you present, you impact. So if you haven't got authenticity in what you're presenting, it is immediately sensed by everybody and has a negative impact on team performance. So a lot of role playing that we get involved with, we tend to think that if we can tell a good story, people will buy it. But people will hear the words, but it's what they feel that is different. So always remember that as a leader, you're responsible for your emotional weight that exists long after you've made a statement.
Long after you've made a statement, and long after you start to see the impact of the decisions that you've made, and perhaps even long after your tenure too, as a leader, there's that long tail of emotional wake. I love that phrase. That it can. What was it, Susan Scott? You said.
Yes, Fierce Conversations.
Fierce Conversations. Yeah, that's amazing. So you talk about how people feel, as part of that emotional wake. And when we first caught up, and I shared with you my thinking around the bigger role that everyone in the organisation can play in fostering mattering as a way of being in the organisation, I remember that you talked to me about an organisation's spirit and soul. Now, they're not necessarily words that many people, certainly with your executive background, necessarily associate with business. Tell me a little bit more about what you mean about an organisation's spirit and soul, and why you use that language.
It took me a long time to realise that we tend to, in the business world, we tend to think of organisations and companies as entities. They're not. They don't exist. They are people. And the quality of the work they do and the productivity one gets out of working with or for them is totally dependent on how the people in that entity feel. And so if they believe in the company, if they believe in the purpose, and they are supportive of a team, then it will achieve great things. So every time you see a person in an organisation, what you're seeing is the potential of that organisation. Your asset, your biggest asset, steps out of the lift every morning when they come to work, and depending on how they feel in that moment will be the quality of your organisation and your outputs.
Wow. That's extraordinary. Every time you're seeing the people in the organisation, you're seeing the potential of the organisation. I wonder how that would really shift and shape some organisations that started to really take that on board, particularly, in a CEO or managing director role as well.
I think we've got a lot of examples in our society today, but not only today, where organisations have felt that they could put forward a certain philosophy, and that that they didn't have to actually behave that way, and that can be appear to be very successful and very profitable, but it's only a matter of time before that lack of authenticity that we were talking about before, things break down. And it doesn't matter the size of the organisation. Indeed, the larger they are, the heavier the unwinding and the impact. So it's really a grassroots belief that builds great organisation, not rhetoric.
No, I really agree with that. And that comes right back to, that authenticity that you talked about just then, but also earlier around authenticity and integrity. Do you think that today, I mean, we live in a world that's filled with, the visuals, the surface level of what it is that, how people live their lives. Like, we've got lots of social media examples of that through Instagram, but actually we've also got a lot more information coming at us. So in one way, we're bombarded with the facade of individuals and institutions saying one thing but perhaps doing another. Do you think we're now living in that really interesting stage in our history where the veil is actually coming down on any kind of smoke and mirrors that perhaps once was possible to maintain?
Well, there's no doubt that with technology and media, that organisations and individuals can't hide as much as they used to be, and a lot of the institutions that have been created haven't got strong foundations, and now you can be called to account. There's greater transparency. So something more fundamental in your question was our society is obsessed with things, and it takes a lifetime for most of us to realise that things don't reward us anywhere near the level that we anticipate they do. So it is a sort of a chasing aspirations that aren't fulfilling, and this whole momentum ultimately brings societies under a lot of strain, and the environment as well. So it's a bit hard to put one's finger on it, but all I know is that the more one has doesn't necessarily, or indeed my experience, doesn't deliver the rewards that people put their efforts into to get those things. So that, together with transparency, is putting a lot of strain on our whole society.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's come back to an organisation's soul now, because that's when that becomes apparent, when you've got all of the beneficiaries, you've got like, I love how you said, the person coming out of the lift every day, that's the potential of your organisation. When all of those people are aligned towards one purpose, they are in flow. It becomes a really special and powerful entity. A CEO or managing director shapes the company's soul by the way that they show up in the role, and then they bring people or magnetise people around them who are like-minded, particularly when they're clear about their purpose. So if you were guiding the CEOs and managing directors listening to this podcast, like you do with your tech group executives, what wisdom would you impart to them about nurturing the souls of their organisations, and what actually happens when they add this dimension to their roles?
I think it starts with the individual, and in a leader, leaders have a very privileged position to impact people's lives and deliver success for organisations. Probably, to keep it very simple, I think the starting point of a leader in their role, in every thought and every conversation, should be, they should have a little mantra that says, when they're embarking on a conversation, it's not about me. And to support that, they should then always reflect that I'm okay. Now, anybody in our society is a success in their own right, so you don't have to justify yourself in every thought and every encounter. Most importantly, you don't have to justify yourself to yourself. So just get over that everything is about oneself. It's not about me. When you then start interacting with other individuals as a kindred spirit, if you like, people sense this, they pick it up, and they don't know why, but it's a confluence of energy that's very positive. So as a leader, just start by saying, it's not about me, I'm okay. Now think about the other person, think about the other party.
So almost like, so one of the things that, I think is really helpful is when we show up, to meet the other exactly where they're at, and almost to come at that in a neutral state. Like you said, this is not about me, this is about the other person, the other party, and being there for them so that I can receive what they've got to give me. Is that part of what you're saying there?
Oh, absolutely. Because remember, I talked about the power of an organisation depends on the state of mind of each employee as they step out of the lift. Hence, as a leader, if you're wanting to build a powerful organisation, you've got to start at the people level, and you've got to see them as the future of the organisation. You've got to see them as being equal in every way with everybody else. And once you get alignment of individuals in that spirit, you get a very, very powerful outcome.
Wow, Glen, that's extraordinary. Can you tell me this before we finish? How do you bring that to your tech groups? Because you're effectively their leader in those settings, guiding them, steering them. Really, you're magnetising them. I mean, people talk, I don't know whether you know this, but people talk about your group, particularly Tech 13, with absolute reverence. It's kind of, especially in Adelaide, it's the group that, people really talk about. And they also talk about people who know you, including other tech chairs, talk about you with reverence around your approach, that you are a spiritual person in the sense that you bring something much more than just the facts, the techniques, the stuff around the edges. You really get into the nub of being. How do you bring that and model that in as a tech chair, so that the people that are in your groups are kind of infused with that way of being that they can take back to their organisations?
A tech member is a very successful person. They usually, quite often, they've built their own businesses. If not, they lead very successful businesses. In relation to their business and their role, there is nobody in the world who knows as much as them about their business. What they want is to share their thoughts in a more reflective way. It's not about advising or... So the essence of being of value to a business owner or a CEO is to listen. And listening comes at various levels, but there's documented that there's clearly, analytically, there's 3 levels of listening, but it's my belief that there's a 4th level, and that is being present. And then there is a connection of an energy field that people sense that words can never convey that communication. So it's all about powerful listening.
I totally agree. I mean, I think that those levels of listening are something that you can also learn. I mean, we talk about active listening all the time, but that level of deep presence, of just holding the space for another human so that they can hear themselves think, they can share what's relevant to them, what's meaningful for them, and feeling okay that that's all right to do that in that environment. I mean, that's clearly part of your success. Any final words that you'd like to leave us with before we wrap up today, Glen? It's been such a privilege.
Oh, only that you're on a journey, you're a pioneer, you're harvesting ancient wisdom and turning it into a practical modus operandi, so I just wish you all the best.
Oh, wow, Glen, that's extraordinary. Thank you very much for that, and thank you for our friendship. I absolutely value it. It's a blessing in my life, and I really thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Ingrid. It's a delight talking to you.